Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me to speak today as well, and to all of the other speakers for what has been a really fascinating day so far. And again, thank you to all the guys, Mark and co, who've organised and pulled the conference together once again this year. So yeah, many thanks. My name's Kira Phipps and I'm the curatorial manager for Southend Museum Service. So I'm responsible for all of the exhibitions that we hold. I curate all the major collection-based exhibitions that we have. I'm responsible for all the collections, including the care and storage of these, with help from a wonderful team, a conservator and 3 assistant curators. I get to work across all of the permanent displays that we have in the museum service, and also on the learning and outreach programs and events. So it tends to be a bit of everything, anything that falls on my desk really. So I'll just spend a little bit of time telling you about the museum service itself and the collections that we hold. So we have 4 venues within Southend Museum Service and also a lovely offsite store. We've got Central Museum and Planetarium, which is home to displays of social history, natural history and archaeology. We've got the Beecroft Art Gallery, which displays fine art from our collection, including oils, watercolours, prints, drawings and sculpture. And we've got a programme of temporary exhibitions of local artists' work in there as well. The gallery also houses the service's fashion and textiles collection, which has a rolling programme of collection-based exhibitions every year in a dedicated fashion space in that building. And we also have 2 beautiful historic properties, Pritwell Priory, which is a Cluniac Priory in Priory Park, and South Church Hall, which is a lovely medieval moated manor house in South Church Gardens. So I do recommend come down and visit us whenever we get to open. So to give you an idea of the individual collections that we hold, the fine art collection dates between 1600 to present day, with works by Constable, Rossetti, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and numerous old master paintings as well. We've got photography, drawing and sculpture, and our fashion and textiles collection numbers over 10,000 pieces, ranging in date from about 1640 to present day. And we also have, very uniquely, the largest collection of historic swimwear in the UK, which is a very lovely collection. Our social history collection contains, among other things, the largest collection of echo radios, domestic design, memorabilia and related objects in the world, which is very exciting. And our natural history collection, which is really vast, contains some lovely local and national specimens of flora and fauna, including the extremely significant Hoy collection of taxidermy by a man called John Davy Hoy, who was a naturalist and collector who made kind of numerous studies of birds, and is also known to be one of the earliest dealers of specimens of this type at that time. Finally, the thing that you're probably all here for, the archaeology collection that we have contains many other things, including 2 internationally significant finds, the Anglo-Saxon Pritwell princely burial, which has recently gone on permanent display, and soon to be with the collections in the museum service is the London Shipwreck, which you've obviously all heard the wonders of today. So alongside caring for, interpreting and researching all of the collections, we also have a rolling programme of temporary exhibitions across the museum service. So the London was explored in a really popular exhibition called the London Shipwreck, A Sunken Story, which opened to the public in September 2018 in our Central Museum. I can't quite believe it was that long ago now, it feels like yesterday really. So I was very lucky. I curated this show with the help of a fantastic assistant curator called Ellie. And this was something that we were really keen to display when we did, to kind of really boost conversation around the wreck and the developing collection, and to really kind of position this collection as a star within museum service, but also within the borough, so specifically to the local authority, which is Southend Borough Council, that we're governed and funded by. So with all the incredible work that was and still is being undertaken by Steve and his colleagues at the time, and also the wonderful conservation work and research being undertaken in Fort Cumberland, Historic England, with Angela and her team, we wanted to kind of really showcase some examples from the wreck to generate this kind of wider regional interest in what we obviously know is a nationally significant assemblage. So it was really thanks to Angela's willingness, as she touched upon today in her talk, her kind of willingness to accommodate this show that really made it possible. So she was very polite and diplomatic earlier. Essentially, it was an ideal time for the museum service to display when we did, but it was not an ideal time for the team at Historic England, who were really busy conserving the artefacts, undertaking testing and research that she spoke about earlier. So a big thank you to her and her colleagues at Historic England for working really hard to facilitate this work and kind of really understanding the importance of this exhibition and the kind of the impact it would have on the story of the wreck and its future. So the aim of the exhibition was to inform residents and visitors and the public about the wreck, also about its significance and how people have been and continue to engage with this wreck. So as well as to kind of curate a really engaging and fascinating insight into what life on board a ship such as this would have been like, whilst also using the show as a platform to, I suppose, generate more conversation and really open up more dialogue about the future of this wreck. The work we can also do with the collection in future at the museum service was explored, so whether that's through kind of permanent displays, learning and outreach programs, and even through artist commissions. So there's a big future for this collection. So the exhibition was curated with family audiences and subject enthusiasts in mind. However, it did really appeal to a huge variety of audiences, existing and some new, which was really fantastic. So I wanted to curate something that would really kind of appeal to a broad range of audiences and a broad range of people. Importantly, I kind of wanted it to appeal to those who have little to no interest in archaeology or maritime history. So it's really important to appeal to those audiences, as you can kind of convert people that might not necessarily think that this type of subject matter is for them. So by kind of creating something really visually stimulating is really key to this journey, as you can grab someone's attention by creating this, you know, a show with wow factor, essentially. You can then, once they're in the space, you can kind of feed them those facts and figures and really kind of create that perfect platform for engagement, education and enjoyment. So it's, you know, as we all know, it's very difficult to take much away from anything if you don't enjoy yourself when you're experiencing it. So it was really important that this show was fundamentally an enjoyable experience for everyone who came to visit. It needs to be really as accessible as it possibly can be, to as many people as it can be without losing that level of detail. So the interpretive approach I pursued was one of immersion. So we wanted to kind of create an atmospheric and immersive space that really evoked that feeling of being transported into another world, really, all the whilst working with an exceptionally small budget, as most museums are doing. So the colour palette for the show was really kind of reminiscent of a kind of a muddy seaweedy green, with the accent colours drawing on the beautiful aqua kind of teal colour of the cannon, in its current state, obviously, which acted as the most kind of attention-grabbing artefact in the space, not least because of its size, 2 ton, as we've heard about today. So installing a cannon, as we've, again, this is the example that Ruth spoke about earlier, so it's a very beautiful cannon. And we're extremely lucky to have this within the collections now. And so, yeah, installing this cannon into a listed building was quite a challenge, especially with no loading bay entrance. And it was even more interesting when the heavy lifting firm that we were working with informed us that the only way the cannon could come into the building was through the front doors, which I was quite surprised about, especially as it led in from a really busy walkway, a dual carriageway, one lane of which had to be closed for the lorry and the winch lift to unload the 2-ton cannon in its crate. So that was certainly an interesting conversation with the highways department at the council when I said, I need to unload a cannon and put it into the museum. You can imagine what they were thinking at the time. So another challenge that we faced was the museum has access tunnels running all around the outside, or internally in the building, but the outside edge of the building. So we had to have steel plates put over these, any spaces that walked over the access tunnels to ensure that the cannon didn't collapse the floor because of the weight. It was then kind of craned up and lowered into a specially made mount that we had made by Plowden and Smith. So I've got a small film next, which is sped up to double time, but it might be a little bit jittery on Zoom, because I know some films can sometimes be a bit jittery, but this gives you an idea of what was involved in the process. Hopefully you can all see that here. So I mean, it looks almost easy here when the film was sped up, doesn't it? But it was after about 8 hours with 7 people, 2 cranes, 1 articulate lorry and 1 winch truck. This 2-ton, 12-foot beast was in, and it won't ever be coming out again if I can help it. But we have, as we've discussed earlier today, we've just moved the cannon. So it was relocated into the main atrium space of the museum. So it had originally been hidden away by some false walls for another exhibition that we had on immediately after the London, but it's now been freed and relocated to another part of the museum. So as I said earlier, this will be on display for you all to come and visit when we can open the museum again in May. So if you do get the chance, I'd recommend it because it is certainly a sight. It's quite an incredible view when you first come into the museum as well. It gives you a sense of how powerful using an object like that was in an exhibition like this. So and there we go, that's the crew that installed the cannon. They were very delighted because they hadn't worked on an object as heavy as this before. So they were really, really pleased with the results. So the thematic narrative of the exhibition was to kind of really take the visitor on a journey, which began by introducing the visitor to the space with the Samuel Pepys diary entry that we've talked about today, the entry learning of the London's fate. And this was used to kind of really set the scene and to kind of immediately transport that visitor back in time to this time. And this was combined with some other kind of sensory elements, such as the sound of diving, of being underwater, that was playing through the space as the visitor moved through the exhibition. So this kind of really gave them that sense of being right there on the wreck, but you know, both considering its position now as a wreck, but also as its function originally as a ship. So it was really important to kind of locate that visitor. We also used fabric drapes to frame the entrance of the exhibition as you entered. So these were floor to ceiling. So they kind of gave that really grand feeling as you entered the space. They also provided that kind of soft movement, which is reminiscent of the sea in some way, but also I wanted the feeling of ship's sails as you kind of to welcome you into that exhibition. So again, it was just that initial kind of small nod to the ship upon entering the space itself. So the lighting for the show was a really important aspect of the interpretation for me. So I wanted it to be very low lit, almost spotlit, just on the text and the objects, which kind of really created a very dramatic contrast in lighting. So as you moved through the show, it was really clear you kind of being drawn through the space. So this was followed by text interpretation of the top line subjects, such as the construction of the London, what life on board the London might have been like, navigation at this time, naval warfare and ordnance, and also a section on the contemporary engagements with the wreck, as it was obviously a great opportunity to kind of position the work that's going on with the wreck now, and you know, then as well in people's minds upon leaving the exhibition. So when they were kind of brought back to that present, we were leaving them with that sense of wonder and intrigue, essentially, to see more. So you know, we really hoped that would lead to some, you know, support for the organisations that are working so hard to protect this wreck. So we wanted to kind of have that as the lasting kind of message when you were leaving this space. So following on from each kind of panel of this top line information, we had more detailed subtext panels or sections of information that explored the intricacies of these themes in more detail, and it also allowed us to explore areas of interest, such as what happened to the London, as again has been mentioned today. So that allowed people to kind of interact with the text and to have a go at deducing what might have happened from a kind of a list of 3 scenarios. So that, again, just in trying to encourage a bit of that engagement in the space. We incorporated some kind of lighter subtext panels to explore well-known seafaring phrases and where they come from, for example, chock-a-block or a loose cannon. So this again allows those people who don't have much knowledge of this time or of history generally to find that route in, so to make that connection with that time through something that they do know and they would recognise, such as a really common phrase or a saying. So that's always a really great way to kind of hook people in. We pushed the engagement further by incorporating audio visual into the space. So we have these rather fun sound domes that look like giant jellyfish on the walls. And they allow the visitor to stand underneath. It triggers a recording, which might be an oral history, or it might be just a recording of some kind that the visitor can listen to, and they act in a way that you can, it doesn't interact with the space sounds itself, so it kind of blocks out the other sounds, which is really clever. So on these domes, we had some lovely recordings of sea shanties by the London Sea Shanty Collective, who I really recommend following. They're a fantastic group. So we commissioned them to record some pieces for the show. And this was obviously both engaging with contemporary audiences and particularly with a craze in sea shanties that is really taking off again at the moment. But was also at that time, it was becoming really popular as a medium of expression. So this kind of allowed an external group to engage with seafaring history using a medium that obviously dates back hundreds of years, but really celebrates and preserves this medium of expression. So that's something that we thought was a really nice addition to the space. We also had an oral history recording by Alison, who's a wonderful local artist here in Southend, who we originally met through a co-curation project that we were working on with the National Maritime Museum, again, as has been mentioned today, where you can see a small number of artefacts on display there from the London. So it was through this project that we asked the Adult Community College in Southend to act as a community partner. And very lucky for us, Alison was one of the students there, so that's how we met her. So she used this work to inspire her own body of work after the project, which saw Alison make over 300 pairs of beautiful ceramic shoes, as you can see here, to represent all the lives lost on board the London. And I found this to be such a wonderful tribute, but also such an interesting way to represent this wreck. So I asked if we could use a number of pairs of the shoes to act almost as a key through the space, signifying the next theme that you were entering into. So, for example, for naval warfare and ordnance, we used a gorgeous pair that had a shot hole through them, and each pair of shoes would signify the next stage in that story, essentially. We also incorporated a wonderful film by Steve Ellis, who's talking next, documenting his diving experiences under the water, giving people an idea of the conditions and visibility that Steve is working in when he's diving on the wreck. And this was displayed in a small viewing space in the exhibition and added a really kind of a lovely dimension to the show by taking people on that journey. So the journey that Steve goes on quite frequently, so bringing you down to that wreck, kind of bringing you physically there, so you get a much clearer sense of what it's actually like to be down there. As we were working with a very small number of objects compared to the amount that we'd normally include in a show of this size, obviously again it wasn't all the material wasn't complete by that point, understandably, because we had the exhibition so early on in this kind of story, I suppose. So we're working with a small number of artifacts. So it was really important that they could really sing in the space and have that space to kind of speak, as it were. So we had bespoke mounts made for some of the objects. Some already had some from different projects that they'd been featured in. So this kind of really allowed the objects to be the focus inside the showcases, as it can be really hard to achieve this if you are using large showcases, which is what we've got in that space, particularly in the museum. So if you're displaying a smaller number of objects, particularly if they're very fine, you want to ensure that they kind of have that space to really kind of tell their story. So by keeping interpretation and labelling within the case to a very minimum, we were really able to kind of highlight the beauty and fragility of these important finds, which obviously naturally exuded so much impact on their own. So it was really important that any design complemented this and didn't kind of fight against this or overpower them in any way. So again, the lighting was really key to this as well. By creating a very contrasting lighting scheme, we were able to really kind of spotlight and focus on the objects and really kind of elevate them and allow them that space to kind of speak. I wanted to use illustrative graphics to tell the story visually. So this allows us to kind of create a more immersive environment. So I worked with a graphic designer that we contract quite often to produce the vinyls for the walls in exhibitions. So I wanted them to create kind of the outline drawings of ropes and buckets and cannonballs and things like that. And these were applied through the space in black vinyl. So this was kind of a really fun way to bring creativity and kind of easily understandable visual cues into the space in what was a very information heavy exhibition. So this kind of allowed us to break up that text. And again, with the low lighting scheme and the kind of contrasting spotlights, this allowed the empty spaces or the dead spaces in an exhibition, as we call it, if you kind of, as you're to kind of, you know, to really become more immersive, kind of murky zones with the kind of odd glimpse of a seafaring piece of equipment or navigational instrument on the wall as you're kind of moving through the space. So this kind of was a great way to draw visitors through, ensuring that there was that kind of flow through the exhibition, so it draws them through from one section to another. This was also applied to the main introduction wall, which contained the Phipps entry that I've shown you earlier, which was in traditional script to kind of denote the handwriting, and also the outline of the Southend coast. So again, to kind of really locate the visitor immediately. I also wanted there to be some visual references to the cannon and how this would have been interacted with. So behind the cannon on the wall, that was the kind of the wall facing the back of the cannon, we had the shadow of two men loading and lighting the cannon ready to fire, to give, you know, particularly children, I think, to give you an idea of how that gun would have been used, essentially. So this introduced some activity and life to the objects. It kind of brought them to life a little bit, providing these cues for how these things would be used. So originally, all of these background imagery and vinyls were going to be in clear vinyl. So when you moved through the space, you'd get kind of just a shine, that glimpse or outline of something. So the issue with that is that clear vinyl has a much lower sticking strength. So we came in the next morning after having all these vinyls applied to the walls, which was only about 4 days before the exhibition opened, to find that all of the vinyls had fallen off the walls and peeled off the walls, and obviously quite a nightmare scene so close to the opening of the exhibition. So even with hair dryers on the go to try and re-adhere the vinyls to the wall, it just wasn't happening. So we had to go to a plan B, which was using black vinyl, which I'm actually so happy we did, because I feel like it worked so much more successfully than the clear vinyl would have. So that was something that we were really happy with the outcome of that. So we used contextual imagery and paintings in the space to provide another dimension to the narrative and to provide some visuals for the ship itself, for the captain, depictions of the Anglo-Dutch War from the National Maritime Museum, but also from some other collections as well. We also used a print of an artwork called The Map of Shipwrecks in the Thames Estuary by the artist Adam Dant in the space. So we've got the original large-scale work, which is absolutely enormous, in the gallery next door to the museum, but it was too big to fit into the exhibition. It nearly pulled one of the walls over. So it was not an option to have it in that exhibition. So we were kind of encouraging people to go next door into the gallery and to have a look at this wonderful artwork, to give you an idea of what he was kind of looking to do. So this work obviously illustrates all the wrecks in the Thames estuary, and it was a great way to incorporate an artist commission. So this was commissioned as part of the Estuary Festival originally, and people really enjoyed this piece, particularly trying to spot the London, like a game of Where's Wally. So if you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor here, the London is right here in the middle. So that's what I'd tell people when they were looking for it. So to ensure there was obviously opportunities for children to engage and interact within the space, which was so important to again ensure that this story is carrying through younger generations as well, we included some really kind of low-tech rubbing activities on the cannon mount, on the text panels of the markings of the cannon. So you could do these rubbings in the interactive trail that we had also created for children as well. So they could move through the space, they could answer questions, they could draw things, they could take their rubbings from the cannon on the text panels, not from the actual cannon, don't worry. And then they received a sticker upon completion once they'd finished their trail. So we also had a rope knot tying interactive that we made in-house, which was actually really hard. So it was always seemed to be that children did not struggle with tying these knots at all. They really got it, and they found it really, really fun to kind of see if their parents could do the same. But it was the adults that really struggled to do this. So it was always really great to see these kind of frustrated adults and these children just tying these amazing knots with very little help or support. We also had an interactive app in the exhibition on an iPad in the space, which also allowed you to explore the community archaeology project that we ran a few years prior to the exhibition, which saw a group of volunteers being trained in first aid for fines, and for a really brilliant live event at the end of the pier in Southend to see in artefacts that were being recovered that morning by the dive team. So that was a really great way to kind of reference previous projects to again give you an idea of how much work has been going on from all sides with this project, to kind of give people that idea, especially for people who didn't know much about this project at all, because there was a lot of people who had never heard of the London. They didn't even know it was on their doorstep in Southend. So we wanted to kind of ensure that there was some awareness of things that had happened before this exhibition. So on the outside entrance space of the exhibition, we had a wall of information on the London Shipwreck Trust and the work that they're doing, to give people an idea of how they could support the trust as well. So we also had some displays of diving equipment kindly loaned by Steve, which was a really great way to demonstrate the contemporary and very kind of physical interactions with the wreck. And so this was also really interesting for people who have never been diving before and who don't have any, they don't have any knowledge of what might be used when diving or documenting a historic shipwreck. So people really enjoyed this aspect of the exhibition just before you went into the main space. So finally, the reaction to the show was really fantastic. We received a really great number of visitors through the duration of the show. So we had about 14,000 people came to see the London exhibition, which is really healthy for a kind of a small regional museum. And the response to the show was really, really positive. So people felt that they had learned a lot about the London, and importantly, I think for me, people had learned something new. So many of the comments were from people who didn't know that the London existed, and they certainly didn't know that it was on their doorstep in Southend. So that was a really fantastic achievement for us to kind of inform the local community about this really wonderful wreck and the incredible work that's has been and still is taking place. So looking to the future, again, we mentioned it earlier, we'd love to get some of the finds on long-term display, when including the gun carriage, obviously, when the collection is transferred to the museum service in Southend. So this would really allow us to kind of boost that conversation around and access to the collection. Obviously, it's such an incredible story and such an incredible assemblage that is something that really deserves that kind of permanent display. So we hope to do this through a new Rex gallery in the museum. After we've got some major museum refurbishment work we've got coming up that we're hoping to set in motion as soon as we can, but obviously these projects are really large, so especially coming out of the pandemic, it's tricky to know when you can start these things, but that's the plan, is a Rex gallery and some development of the spaces that we have. So until then, keep an eye on all of the social media pages that we have, because we're always doing engagement in store films and things like that. So we were saying that we'd like to do one that is kind of an unboxing, if you will, of the gun carriage. So that'll be something to look forward to. But until then, yes, I suppose watch this space, and that will be the next thing we've got on in the museum. So thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you found this kind of whistle-stop tour of curating the exhibition to be helpful or interesting in some way, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kira. Brilliant and perfect timing as well. So one of the questions that came in quite early is with regards to sort of this as a case study in terms of presenting, a collection of material from a shipwreck site, and whether or not the ethos and the background behind the exhibition has been or is going to be written up, published, or is this video the way in which we learn how to display a collection?
Well, I mean, it's certainly something we'd like to do. I mean, we're doing a lot of in-store tours at the moment, because obviously engagement is so tricky to do during this climate. But I mean, that's something we'd love to do, because I think the curation side of things and knowing how to engage new audiences and things like that is, for me, is obviously really interesting. But I think it's so important in ensuring that these stories kind of have some longevity and legacy. So this, working in a museum setting, I think is so important to ensure that we can kind of maintain that dialogue, which is definitely something we want to do, is to kind of keep that engagement going, keep that conversation around this wreck going. So yeah, I definitely think that's something, I'd love to do something like that. So it's just about when we can find the time alongside all the collections work that we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, of course, as is always. I mean, lots of people have commented about how either the exhibition looks amazing or was amazing in terms of people that attended. I was there for the opening, and I can't believe, like you said, that it was back in whatever it was, September 2018.
Yeah.
My goodness, how the world has moved on. And yes, Ruth, who we heard from earlier, it was a great exhibition, well worth the journey, all the way from Leeds. So in terms of in terms of the future, and in terms of storing, the assemblage when it comes to you, and the long-term display of it, one element, of course, would be an exhibition, the Rex exhibition in the gallery, presumably in the Central Museum.
Yes, yeah, that's where it would be. So we'd like to put on a permanent Rex gallery.
What about an appetite from the council or the museum service for anything even bigger, anything even bolder?
Well, I always have the appetite for something bigger and bolder at the museum. It's just trying to ensure that we can balance all the different views. I suppose being a local authority as a political organisation, we've got to be mindful of all the different, I suppose, considerations around the museum. But I definitely think the plans that we do have, we're looking at how we can really develop the site that we have, and how we can work with the space around the site to kind of create something really fantastic as a destination for Southend, definitely. So we're hoping to definitely expand on the museum and the work that it's doing in a really big way, much bigger than we've ever done before. So that's kind of hopefully on the cards, but never say never. You don't know what might happen in the future.
Indeed. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much,